Hello again. I'm continuing from last time and carrying on talking about some of the books I've had out over the years that I've written in 30 years of publishing. Now, I've talked about my uh, kids' books, and that's just about all of them. I'm missing things out, I realize. That's a heap of them from the last 20 years or so. I'm missing out my Doctor Who books because I'll talk about them some other time. I've talked about my books with, my novels with Chatto and Windus and Alison and Busby. That's all of them from the uh, 90s and early 2000s. They were all kind of literary fiction, usually about council estates or people from showbiz living faded lives in the present, or lesbian vampires seeking revenge on people. It was a real hodgepodge of high culture and low cultural artifacts clashing, usually in the north. And what else? These are my Brenda and Effie books. Actually, it's not all of them at all, but I will talk about the first few. Brenda is 200 years old. She's the bride of Frankenstein, and she's gone to retire, live in retirement in Whitby on the northeast coast. And she starts, well, she begins wanting to live a quiet life, just looking after people in a B&B. And she hooks up with Effie, who lives next door and runs an antique shop. She hooks up with her as a best friend. And Effie's a witch, and they get to know each other, and immediately they're embroiled in danger and disaster, and they solve mysteries and get kidnapped, and they escape, and they meet lots of monsters. And the whole point of this series is that Whitby is where all the wives and girlfriends, all the exes of the old Gothic monsters live. And and that's the premise. Never the Bride was book one in hardback there from Headline. Headline had no idea what they bought, I don't think. They kept trying to sell it as science fiction. In fact, 6 books in, eventually I had a meeting with sales and marketing at the top of Headline Towers on the Euston Road. 6 books in, and the woman there gave me some stale cake and some tea, and she said, obviously we'll be pitching it to all the science fiction departments in Waterstones, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, no, these books are not for the usual kinds of science fiction people. When I did readings for them, I'd go to places like a library in the Calder Valley. I remember doing that during some kind of wintry night. And there was a small group of women who were a book club, and they said, we don't read science fiction, we don't read horror, and we don't read fantasy, but we loved Brenda and Effie because we'd follow Brenda anywhere into any genre, and I loved that. That was, middle-aged women, older women reading genres that booksellers don't think they read. This is about 15 years ago, 10 years ago. No, it's more than that. It's about 17 years ago. And nowadays, of course, people are used to what they call cozy fantasy or cozy sci-fi or cozy detective fiction. And then it was a bit of a battle to get people to understand that, genre is open to everyone. It's not just middle-aged blokes in heavy metal t-shirts, which is how it's sometimes simply seen. Something Borrowed was the sequel, um, which, oh God, I remember someone saying, you recount the whole of the first book in the first chapter as a piece of gossip between two old women in a cafe. Like, yes, of course. um, that was somebody who hadn't quite realized how camp these books are. He was somebody who thought that horror had to be horrendous and grueling and awful, and it was never camp. And of course, horror is the campest genre in the world, I think. Conjugal Rights, where Brenda's ex-husband comes back to haunt her. It's the one about Frankenstein. Part of this became a Radio 7 radio show in about 3 episodes, and that was great fun. Having my own Radio 4 extra, as it now is, show. And that was the first time Joanna Tope played Brenda. and she went on to read all of the books on audio, which is some undertaking, I have to tell you, because the books started getting longer. This is Hell's Bells, the fourth one. This is the one in which there's a film being made in Whitby, and it's starring Carla Sorensen, the lesbian vampire actress from this novel earlier. She's reintroduced as a new character, and somehow the two women, Brenda and Effie, fall into the DVD extras of a haunted DVD that they pick up in a charity shop, and they end up in the past, in the making of a spooky movie. I think that's what happens. Next one was The Bride That Time Forgot, which I think at that point I was obsessed with things like sagas that had different primitive dimensions that people escaped into, the kind of Edgar Rice Burroughs kinds of worlds. And so they end up in this ridiculous world elsewhere. Somewhere, oh, here's the next one. Brenda and Effie Forever. By then, headline had dropped me after 6 books. I'll tell you about the 6th one in a bit. So Snow Books, bless them, which again are small but dedicated and lovely, published this one to cap off the series, which I did in about 2012. And I got more of my own way with doing it for a smaller audience. It became even more outrageous. It begins in Paris, and you have the Phantom of the Opera and the Hunchback of Notre Dame living together. I think they're boyfriends. God, this really got up people's noses, some of this stuff. Camping up the classics. Anyway, that was that series of 6 at that point. Since then, I did another collection called A Game of Crones, and that's back there somewhere on my shelves of shame, which contain everything I think that I've ever published, where these are usually hidden away from the prying eyes. And then more recently, I did Beyond the Veil with Obverse Books last year. I can't crick my neck. I returned to Brenda and Effie, and it's 20 years later, and one of them is just a head in a tank, and the other one's a ghost. That's available from Obverse Books right now. I did a sidestep novel, 666 Charing Cross Road, which was set partly in New York, a lot in New York. And it's about Brenda's rougher younger sister who washed up in America. It's a kind of joke about, you know, when they used to do American remakes of sitcoms or movies. And it's kind of that, but set in modern day New York. They come to Britain at the end, towards the end, and they go to London, so there's lots of stuff like Charing Cross Road and bookshops. And we actually had a launch in Charing Cross Road in a nice bookshop just off it called Goldsborough Books, which specialises in first editions. It's very fancy. And loads of lovely people there, loads of friends. And I think they sacked me the very next day. It was really nice. Terrible thing to do. Yeah, I think I was celebrated one night and dumped the next day. Anyway, that was Headline, which is a very big commercial publisher. I guess it was a hard sell at that point, writing cozy mystery with older female characters in a gothic, rompy adventure comedy context. Now, of course, they could do it at Doddle. Lots of books are like that. Anyway, here's a few kind of odd ones. The Annual Years, which is a non-fiction book I wrote about the Doctor Who annuals published by World Distributors, a series of books that I loved through childhood and wanted to know more about and to explain my particular love for them, because they're very peculiar and they weren't loved as much as they should be by the fans of Doctor Who. And they were written and drawn here. They were created here in Manchester on Lever Street in town. So that was all wonderful to find out about. That's Obverse Books as well. Now, in 2013, our stray cat, Fester, who had lived with us for 7 years, died. And I sat down and immediately wrote the story of the past 7 years in his voice and told lots of my own story. And it was like being possessed. I'd never sat down and written something from beginning to end all in one piece like that. It took a lot of weird concerted effort over months to write this story, my cat book. So it has a very particular place in my heart. We sold it to America first for some reason. We had an inkling that Barclay Books would like it, and they did, and they bought it. But the British side of Penguin didn't. And so it's never been out in this country, which is a shame. At the moment, I'm trying to get the rights back from Penguin because they've let it disappear, basically. People love this book. And it begins with the last day of Fester's life and then goes backwards. And it makes people cry and it makes them laugh, which sounds such a cliche, but it's true. I did a follow-up with Obverse, Welcome Home Bernard Socks, which is Fester watching after the arrival of Bernard in 2013, watching his successor move into the house and the adventures he has. Yeah, I'd love to bring them out again. That's a book, the Silver Archive collection, which is a series of books about TV shows, and I did one about Christmas telly, and this is called The Christmas Box. And it's essays about Christmas, basically, which, of course, I love writing about. Every book of mine has a chapter at least set at Christmas. Iris Wildthyme has taken up an awful lot of my writing time, often on audio, often as a character in Doctor Who, as a spin-off character in various things, as a character in her own right, in her own novels, not attached to anything else, Doctor Who or nothing. She's a kind of trans-temporal rat bag, travelling in a double-decker bus with her friend Panda, and she can travel into any genre, any kind of story, and the multiverse is hers. That's a one-off that I did called Iris Wildthyme and the Polythene Terror, which we did as a kind of pastiche of an old Target book. It's the same size and shape. The other Iris books that I did for snow books, lovely snow books, are here. I did Enter Wildthyme and Wildthyme Beyond, both of which have been, in fact, all three of these have been recorded by Katie Manning for Big Finish as audiobooks in recent years. What else? Fellowship of Ink is about the Smudgelings, which are this 1930s team of writers who also solved mysteries in a university town. And it's a flashback to Brenda's earlier years, where she's the housemaid for an old professor who writes fantasy novels. And this is a novel set back then. Also recorded for Big Finish by Louise Jameson in recent years. And The Novel Inside You is my book on writing, creativity, and giving yourself permission to be somebody who creates. Big, generous slab of essays and drawings as well. I illustrated it. And Snowbooks did this about 5 years ago, and I loved doing this. I'd done a book in 2001, co-edited and wrote a book on creative writing called the Creative Writing Course Book, which people use on courses and things. And it's a good, generous book with 44 contributors besides us. But this was me by myself in 2019, talking about how to pick yourself up and be a writer or an artist every day against the odds, when nobody wants you to, when no one gave you permission to, and very few people encouraged you to, and very few people are encouraging you still. It's a place, it's a book that you can go to for a cheerful word and a kick up the arse. Hunky Dory was a novel I ended up self-publishing. It took years to write. You can see it's quite long. It's set here in Levenshume, kind of, South Manchester. It follows on from all my other books, although all the characters are new. But it's the same kind of world of a large cast of characters having ludicrous adventures and in and out of each other's lives. And a whole bunch of women doing an MA course kidnap their professor and keep him in the cellar and do unspeakable things to him. I couldn't get any of the agents I was working with to hike this around. I couldn't get anybody to want to read it. And I don't know why. I still love it. I believe in it. Anyway, so I made it happen on with the help of my friend Rylan, who's a whiz at computer stuff, and my friend Siobhan, who did the cover. So we did it. And also we did Christmassy Tales, which is a short story collection of all my Christmas stories. I've done so many over the years. There's somewhere missing from here. There's another collection of stories I did called 12 Stories that Salt Books did, and I can't find it. It's on my shelves somewhere. I might have lent my only copy to someone, which would be terrible. Right, I'm going to stop in a second. My alter ego wants to be mentioned, Elsie Mason. I wanted to write sagas. I wanted to write about my grandparents and great-grandparents in the kind of war years and the early part of the 20th century, about Tyneside, about all these amazing, mostly female characters and all the legends I'd heard, and I want to invent new things for them. And the only way of doing that these days, it turns out, the only way for a gay man in the 21st century to write popular fiction about working class women is to pretend to be one. As somebody said on some comment on Facebook recently, how ironic, after, you know, George Eliot all those years ago had to pretend to be a man, and now I don't know what the point was, whether that was a triumph for feminism or a blow to the patriarchy or what really. But it seems kind of weird. I love having pseudonyms. It was an open kind of secret at first, but I only recently could start talking about, we only recently kind of agreed that I should start talking about being Elsie. And actually the reaction has been great. Nobody bats an eyelid really. Bats an eyelash, that's the phrase, isn't it? There is, of course, a long history of male writers adopting female pseudonyms to write historical sagas. There's lots of them. Over the years, you'd be surprised. Anyway, this was where I began in 2020. During the pandemic it came out, which is quite difficult to do a book in disguise, in secret, during a pandemic when you can't go out to bookshops. So the fact that Elsie Mason ever survived beyond book one is incredible. The Biscuit Factory Girls is where it begins. With Irene Farley coming from Norfolk up to Tyneside and moving in with a big family near the docks and the factory. And then the Biscuit Factory Girls at war and a wedding for the Biscuit Factory Girls. And that's, they took 3 years to come out, and they're a huge saga with lots and lots of characters. And then the new one, The Runaway Girl, goes back in time, the same street, some of the same characters, but we go back to the end of the First World War and follow Kathy Carmichael, who works in the pub. And you see her all the way through the first trilogy, but this is her story, beginning with her arrival as a runaway in 2018, and the next 2 books, which are both written now and waiting to come out in the next 6 months, follow her through the 20s and 30s and 40s. So that'll be 6 books in all, in the 16 Streets saga about South Shields. from Elsie Mason. Right, now I'll finish up with talking about my books with HarperCollins in recent years. During the pandemic, I started doing cartoons. I reminded myself that what I'd always wanted to be as a kid was a cartoonist. And I did cartoons about Panda and the cat and the dreadful Teddy. And they are, I've annotated this one. They are filthy mouthed and, oh God, it smells so nice. It still smells of fresh ink. It smells like Ladybird books did when I was a kid. I loved doing this book so much. I'd got myself an iPad and a Apple Pencil stylus, and that's what made it possible to do cartoons. I followed it up the next year. This sold quite well. This didn't the next year. It was my satire on those kind of nature books. Go and live in a very expensive house in the countryside and watch your life improve. Those kinds of books, self-help books. It's also a satire on Beatrix Potter, Beatrix Pottymouth. And it let me do lots of pastiche stuff, which I love doing, but I don't think people were ready to see the revered Beatrix Potter sent up quite so savagely. Anyway, some people really love it. I just don't think it got into enough places. Then last year I did my third book with HarperCollins, which wasn't as jokey. It was pictures of cats. Cats owned by almost everybody I know. It's called Puss in Books. And it's lots of literary quotes with paintings of cats. A lovely, colourful, restful, sweet and tender book. With some fabulous quotes. Khalil Gibran, when you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you will see that in truth you are weeping for that which has brought you delight. Yep, I love doing this. It was really hard work, and I'd love to do a book about dogs, but I'm told that they probably won't want one. I think everybody wants a book about dogs like that. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. I've gone over time. What am I doing now? What am I working on now? I'm trying to write a domestic thriller, a kind of crime book, because a couple of years ago, I won a Silver Dagger for Best Short Story in English, Best Crime Story for that year. It was a story I had in an anthology that Sam Stone edited. And yeah, the Crime Rights Association gave me this fantastic prize. So I thought I should write a crime book, really. I've always wanted to. It kind of isn't. The way it's working out isn't really crime. It's a thriller, a psychological thriller. In my own style, as everything is, which is why, well, it's why everything I've just told you, it's why my books are kind of in different genres all over the place, because I go to the thing that interests me the most. And yeah, find the best place for it to go. Anyway, I'm going to go because this is going to be too long. I'll see you again in the next episode. Let me know what you think. If you want to hear more about my stuff, or if you'd rather hear me talk about other people's books. I hope it hasn't been too too boring. I don't know. I feel proud of what I've done, but also it's a bit kind of shamefaced as well. Really, in some ways, here's a whole load of books that you've never heard of. Anyway, see you again soon. Bye bye.